Good morning, everyone. My name is Cécile Walton. I'm a director in MinterEllison Consulting, and with my colleague, Donna Worthington, who is a partner in MinterEllison Consulting, we're going to try to unpick a little bit that topic, the risk of polycrisis or the uncomfortable truth about ESG. All will be revealed. But before we get started, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. To set the tone for our conversation, we're going to play a short clip extracted from a video from the World Economic Forum. It's only 1 minute.
Looks like COVID cases are exploding.
Historic drought and wildfires in the West.
Full-scale invasion.
6 months for floodwaters to recede.
These pipeline gas cuts have added unprecedented pressure.
It's no secret that the world is in crisis. Faced with destabilization from many different directions, all at once, what was previously coined a global crisis has escalated. We are in a polycrisis.
If you just read a newspaper or watch the news, in a sense, you are presented with this collage. And the collage begins to just look incoherent and crazy to the point where you begin to wonder whether you actually sort of be able to any longer trust your own senses. And what the polycrisis concept says is, relax. This is actually the condition of our current moment.
So I don't know for you, but I don't feel that relaxed right now, because that's quite sobering footage. But maybe we'll start with a conversation. Polycrisis, what is that, Donna?
Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I just wanted to also thank Uncle Brendan for the amazing welcome to country and generosity that he demonstrated yesterday. So polycrisis, I think we've heard, and it was a fantastic segue actually, because what we heard just in the previous session and Adam's quote in terms of it's really all about risk. The difference in this context and why it was such a popular phrase that was thrown around at Davos was it was not only about individual crises, but the compounding effects of where they overlapped. And we've certainly seen and lived that over the last few years as a result of COVID, supply chain issues, geopolitical issues, and I guess the growing divide that we've seen more broadly, in addition to cyber risk. We've heard a lot of those themes over the last day and a half, and so we'll touch on a little bit more about what that looks like. I think from an interesting context perspective, we've really looked at the insights that have come out of the Global Risk Report, which was prepared by at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. And it was interesting just to hear even the insights of those who attended Davos to reflect on the fact that when you're actually going to Davos and usually surrounded by beautiful snow, that actually this year there was hardly any snow. So it was an interesting kind of context piece for people as they started to kind of look into not only what are the current risks, but also what is emerging. And so it really kind of, I guess as a risk professional, we really reflected on what does our future look like and what does it mean to be living in an environment where this term polycrisis will be something that becomes a core capability within our businesses as to how do we live and respond in a state of constant crisis. So we'll explore that a little bit more today.
And why is that relevant for the banking sector to talk about that concept and explore the topic a bit more?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because one of the themes that we've heard and is that we have to ensure that we don't become complacent. We're in a really incredible position thanks to a lot of work over a number of years in the banking sector. But at the same time, what we've seen is that crises, and particularly the impact of polycrisis, can have incredible impacts in a really short period of time. And we've certainly heard that even in the last session, was the speed at which these things could come and impact, and how we sometimes don't understand where that compounding effect will really kind of play out. What we also know is, and the survey results kind of indicate that there's a lot of effort and energy being put into managing what are considered to be old types of risk, whether that be inflation or cost of living issues or growing social unrest. What we aren't spending a lot of time thinking about or investing energy in is these new risks, which require effort and energy and require a different type of capability. And we've heard even today about some of the challenges of being able to get space and time and even capability within organisations to be able to think about that. So we're certainly hearing some of the challenges of actually being able to provide internal effort and energy and capacity to stop and think and reflect on what are these future emerging risks, what are these new risks in addition to the old risks, and what are the potential scenarios that we need to be considering and factoring in. So maybe, Cécile, from an ESG point of view, do you want to kind of talk about what that means in the context of ESG?
And bring a bit of color. And before I do, for context, before joining MinterEllison Consulting just over a year ago, I was at Commonwealth Bank, where I stayed for more than 10 years in a sustainability role, shaping and driving the ESG agenda at a whole of group level. It's been a ride. And it's been a ride because I saw, from a front row standpoint, how topics around climate change, but not only, also topics around modern slavery, human rights, disclosures, and the likes, started picking up a fair bit of steam and really becoming a topic that not only were relevant to a small group of individuals, of which I was one of, but also to many in various business units who found themselves having to tackle and address the risk of climate change through matters such as scenario analysis. We've heard about that from various parties yesterday with the likes of Graham Sinden from APRA, but also Alex Pugh from CBA, all the way through the way services and products can be brought to market in a way that resonates with what customers want and society expects. So from my perspective, the Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum is a go-to document that I've been looking at every year, every time it comes out in January, because, and I'll put a slide right now, it gives a very good visual of how complicated the world we live in is, which is what you've got with that web showing all these issues that are interconnected, essentially. And also, it gives a sense of how the top risks, the top 10 risks, are traveling from one year to the next. On a 2 years horizon, as well as on a 10 years horizon. And from my vantage point, what I saw very clearly coming through year on year is the fact that what's deemed as environmental type matters have climbed up steadily and much faster in recent years to the top of the pile, essentially. And you can see on the 10-year horizon, the failure to mitigate climate change or the failure of climate change. I can't really read it from here, but that's when I need glasses. Anything to do with climate change has really risen to the top, but also matters of biodiversity and the like. And clearly it's to be considered in light of the immediate issues we are all contending with in terms of inflation, cost of living, or social unrest in some parts of the world. But that risk report is really a very good reflection of where we are, but very importantly, where we are headed. And to your point about ESG, I've heard a lot in recent weeks the attempts that a number of parties are having in putting the E in one bucket next to the S in the other bucket, followed by the G in the third bucket. From my perspective, all of that is interconnected. There's no such thing as climate change in an E bucket. When you think about it, climate change, and I'll bring a very practical example here. So the frequency and severity of extreme weather events have got ramification on the social fabric of our communities because that can impact the cost of living. It can also create a whole raft of issues in terms of housing affordability, insurance affordability. So think about the Brisbane floodplain. If your home has been flooded and you cannot go anywhere but the Brisbane floodplain you may want to rebuild. The rebuild might not be something you can insure very easily, and it might be flooded not in the next 100 years, but in the next 5. And that creates a greater divide. Still on climate change, you can see that there are more and more commentaries around the health ramification of climate change. So heat waves will lead to more cardiovascular issues. And as I was preparing up for this session today, being French, I went back to something that happened in France 20 years ago, time flies, by the way, whereby there was a heat wave in 2003, and that heat wave led to the direct death of 15,000 people in France. Because compared to Australia, no such thing as aircon in France. So people were very ill-equipped, the infrastructure was not ready, and that created that unbelievable number. So really, you can see the ramifications are large, and I could go on with the impact of climate change on the refugee crisis. So all of these as consideration that people would like to put in a separate bucket from the E of climate change, no such thing. And the G is all around the decision-making process, whereby organizations, political constructs, or individuals have got to make clear and distinct decisions on how they're going to tackle the challenge in the first place through the right processes and ways of governing that decision-making process. So it's really interconnected from my standpoint. And just before we change gear a little bit, on those risks, what's been interesting to me is very much the fact that, again, you can see the likely impact, as in the severity of environmental risks that relate to climate change, natural disaster, and biodiversity, continue to steadily grow in importance. And that relates very much to what we've heard in the last day or so on developments such as TNFD, for example. So, Donna, if I change gear a little bit and we try and bring back that conversation to our shores, from your perspective, ESG-related polycrisis in the Australian banking industry, what exactly comes to mind?
Before I answer that, I might just add an additional comment to what you were saying before, because there was a statement this morning about, we're quite protected living so far away to think that issues aren't impacting people and we don't feel kind of the fallouts. I just want to share a story. We're doing some pro bono work for an organisation in Melbourne at the moment that works, it's a not-for-profit, it works with a lot of, in a strong multicultural community, and looks at gender equality and family violence. And speaking to the CEO the other week, she was talking about the fact that there had been some violence that had broken out in a particular country, and in response, in terms of the interconnectedness, understood that that would translate immediately to family violence and additional requests for assistance. So it's quite interesting with that combination of not only a particular issue that was, as far away as we could imagine, in addition to the cost of living pressures and interest rate rises, we're just seeing such a great demand on their services in terms of providing support from a violence perspective. And I know we're going to be the next sessions are going to be touching on more of what that means in a banking context. But I think it's just really important to understand that these things really do have an impact for many in our community now. Look, I won't go into too much of what this means, because I think we've heard a lot about the impacts of geopolitical tensions and what that means in terms of the ability to kind of obviously affect our investment flows and capital markets. I've touched on the kind of rise in cost of living and how that is impacting in terms of household budgets and also consumers' ability to repay loans, and as I mentioned, how that kind of translates for many in communities. While we didn't necessarily see it kind of coming through in terms of calls for assistance around default of loans, there are certainly other trigger points and data points which indicate that there is pressure in our community. We talked about technological advancements, and we heard from Jo yesterday in terms of the importance and the opportunity that artificial intelligence provides us, but also it also gives us new avenues for misconduct and harm. And then obviously from a regulatory standpoint. So, you know, the trends kind of continue to reinforce why this matters, and it's really important to kind of build capability to be able to respond and accordingly.
So is there light at the end of the tunnel? Because right now I feel like we are bringing a bit of a cloud of doom and gloom on the audience with the world we live in.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that is the reality. I do feel probably that, you know, the banking sector plays such a critical role in society and our ability to respond to all of these things. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? Absolutely. So I have a huge amount of faith. I have 3 teenagers who constantly remind me what a dinosaur I am, and their ability to respond and work with technology, their ability to kind of challenge what I think are the norms and behaviours, and actually it's that kind of disruption in thinking and their ability to be able to be so agile is incredible. I think we're seeing that play out in terms of consumer expectations, and we've certainly seen enough data points here over the last day and a half to reinforce that, as well as activists. So, and then of course we've seen this incredible, and we've heard about this incredible investment. So I do feel like there is, that we are on the path, but the report certainly says we are at an inflection point, and that everyone in this room has a role to play to really ensure that this goes beyond a nice statement that sits in a report to actually really thinking about how do we each individually influence and foster the change that's required.
And before we explore a little bit what we can do on an individual basis in our respective organizations, I've got another little extract from that World Economic Forum video where we'll hear some more from Adam Tooze, the historian that spoke in the first part. Hopefully that will give us a bit more of a lift.
So on a societal level, the polycrisis is very real. But how does it actually feel? And what impact does it have on us on a personal level?
You cannot live through the experience of 2020 and not be quite profoundly shaken in your assumptions about what you can take for granted, especially as a young person. It's all very well for somebody at my age to look at the world and say, well, you know, I can take a hiatus for 18 months. But I, know from watching my daughter's experience of it, that it's much more panic-inducing if you don't actually know what the rest of your life's going to be like. If you've been feeling confused and you've been feeling as though everything is impact on you on the same time, this is not a personal, private experience. This is actually a collective experience. And if you've been having a hard time reducing all of this to a common denominator, then, join the club. In fact, it doesn't seem to be reducible to a common denominator. And if you have been having odd thoughts about how, your ability to insulate your house because you want to pursue an agenda of climate neutrality is being foiled by the fact that all of the raw materials cost too much because supply chains are screwed up and because Vladimir Putin has started a war, and that strikes you as weird, well, that is the reality that we currently face. And so I think the idea of the concept is presumably simply to make that experience of confusion, of the weird intersection of things which appear to really not have anything to do with it. Why is it, what is my problem with insulating my house got to do with a war in Ukraine? Well, this sort of concept opens up the threads through which you can begin to see the connections.
So I take away from that there's comfort in company, and starting from a position of understanding the world we live in is a good place to start. But practically speaking, in terms of what we can do, what would you want to share, Donna?
Yeah, so look, I think what we've heard throughout the last day and a half is the importance to build resilience in the system. And not only have we seen that within our organisations around even our ability to respond and support our employees, but it obviously comes through in terms of the themes around technology resilience, the organisation's resilience, our business model resilience, and the list goes on. So resilience is obviously a key theme, but actually what I probably want to touch on today is what it means in terms of our ability to respond as leaders. There's a really key role here from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. The kinds of things that we've seen on the screen, the kinds of messages that we're hearing, what we've talked today about what's going on requires a different type of thinking and different people to come to the table with different solutions. And that's the benefit and the value of having a diverse organisation, and particularly at our boards and senior management level. And so I think that there is absolutely a role to play from a diversity perspective, but an inclusiveness perspective. Aside from that, the report does outline the critical role in terms of preparedness, so being really clear in terms of risk identification and foresight, recalibrating around these new or future types of risks, investing in risk preparedness, and obviously strengthening our ability to prepare and respond to a crisis. So I think that those are really critical principles, but in that broader context piece, there is a bigger piece around how we think about our systems and structures within our organisations to truly respond to transformation. So we're going to have to be able to identify and respond and transform quicker than ever. And I think with that comes incredible opportunity. And I'd like to finish the session and bring it to a close by leaving 3 questions for us all, ourselves included, whilst we're at it, might as well. And it's really to demonstrate that there are more questions than there are answers at the moment. And really the first one is, what is the business of banking? How can you, in your role and in your organization, bring humanity considerations and challenges in your day-to-day activities and in the purpose of your organization? And finally, in the words of Paul Pullman, former Unilever CEO and a leading light in terms of ESG, has been playing in that field for a long time. Is the world better off because you and your company is in it? And it should be a simple yes or no answer. And if no is the answer, you may want to think carefully about what you do next. Thank you. Thank you.
Very interesting. Can I ask you one really quick question of my own? I'm sure you've heard some of the commentary that says that ESG is the sort of thing that really bumps up the agenda in good times, and then when the brakes start to come on the economy and you have to start making tough choices about capital, tends to get pushed aside a bit, and then as a nice to have, not a must have, and then brought back. Is there a bit of truth in that narrative, and is that something we have to be careful about?
That's most certainly something to be very careful about, because it would be very imprudent to take that position if the economy was to be a bit more challenging. There was a lot of conversation about greenwashing yesterday and a fair bit of greenwashing as well, but there's also blue washing. So all the colors of the rainbow are going to come through it, blue washing being around human rights and modern slavery, and essentially what you might have considered a nice to have 10 years ago, no such thing. It is most important for organizations to very carefully consider the way they go about their daily business and the role they wish to play in society, or they must play in society, courtesy of the pressure.
Fantastic. Cécile, Donna, thank you so much. Give them another round of applause. Wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you.